And so, what's really beautiful about the idea of astrology, and this is very important because we are coming into this whole spiritual awakening. Really, what it means is that we're starting to recognize that we are these souls that have incarnated multiple times in our lifetime, and we're all culminating to this time. And so, a lot of biblical concepts or biblical prophecies, or even Jewish or Muslim or every other religion, Buddhist prophecies talk about the time of the age of Aquarius, where we would start to recognize that we were not just bodies that were born and died, but we were actually souls that were able to embody into a body and was able to experience life for 80 years or whatever. And to me as a gamer, it's like choosing a video game, pressing start, and when I play the game, I become these digital characters. And that digital character, however I act in that character has a chart. That character has a particular way they are going to experience the world, right? And so even when we play a role playing games, you can say, hey, do I want to be a male, female? Do I want to have these traits as a human? I want to be a dwarf. I want to be an elf. A lot of these concepts show up in our astrology. And so what's really beautiful is that astrology shows us this multi-dimensional facets of who we are. The numbers tells us many different things in your chart, whether you've been incarnated how many times you've gone and done certain lessons. So what would happen is your chart will start getting overloaded with certain elements because you've probably reincarnated to experience that part of your life. Versus today, a lot of us have come back, and there's a lot of remembering of old past lives, and this is why a lot of us have started doing past life regression. Astrology gives us an opportunity. A lot of people do past life regression with astrology to be able to see what are some lessons that you have kind of brought over from your past lives. And then karma. I think as you all learned, the 12th house is about karma, so there tend to be a lot of karma energies in that house, and that will show up in kind of certain things that you are connected to. And so what I love about astrology is this whole concept of the soul's purpose. And the soul's purpose breaks down who we are in these three concepts of physical attributes. This usually, I've noticed, these physical attributes show up as medical astrology, right? So if you are a fire sign, then you tend to actually probably get worked up a lot, get hot a lot, but then that means you probably also lose a lot of fluids, right? During the summer, it's great because you want to be out and about because the sun's out, but this is where you overdo your fire energy and you might actually run out of liquids or fluids in your body. And so it is important for us in medical astrology to understand who you are, because I'm not going to give you the same suggestion of like, hey, calm down, you're probably overdoing your fire and you're probably losing liquids. Eat these foods to support your fluids. But to someone who actually is a water sign, I would never tell them to drink more fluids. If anything, I tell them, hey, the sun's out, it's beautiful and warm, go take outside more. It would actually maybe offset some of your depression or sadness, because water signs, if left in the dark, might actually start to be a little depressed, right? And so this is where they come out to the sun, Cancer time, and they're a little bit more happy. The sun kind of hits them and they're able to pick up a lot more of that warmth and keep their fluids warmer rather than being at home and feeling cold and depressed. And then the second piece is this mental connection, our psychology, our consciousness, our subconsciousness, right? We talk about subconsciousness as our moon, our triggers, that the things that we don't do because we feel emotionally stable or unstable, right? And this goes back to this concept of the genders again. Men and women both have sun and moon. That means that men experience emotions. Here's the difference. When a moon has a watery element to it, they tend to be much more sensitive, right? And so when men have these watery energies in their charts, they tend to be much more sensitive men. That does not mean that they are feminine man who should be turned to women, right? This is a very important understanding, because we have chosen to have this beautiful synastry and chemistry and geometry of the planets we chose. And so when you have actually a woman who tends to have maybe to have a lot of fire elements or air elements, she may not be in tune with her emotions. And this is where you might run into these women who tend to be really good at doing the men's job, right? But they tend to have a harder time connecting to their emotions because the elements in their chart naturally gives them affinity to doing jobs that require no emotions, right? And so this is important because this is the explanation of like why we have male nurses. Male nurses, I have noticed a lot of times they have Cancer rising, they have a Cancer moon, maybe some Pisces in there. And I've definitely had those moments. I am a doctor now, so I do have a lot of these elements where I feel emotions for others and I want to actually help them or give them the opportunity to help them if I can. And so this is why, for me growing up, I tend to be a very sensitive guy, but people who recognize that sensitivity understood that I was just sensitive and not that I was feminine and that I wanted to feel or I wanted to identify as a woman. Okay? And so it's very important to understand the psychology of who we are because the psychology of who we are is supposed to express ourselves, but if our psychology is suppressed, let's say we have parents that did not want us to show emotions, and our psychology requires us to feel emotions to understand ourselves, then we've been stunted, right? As an Asian male, I was not able to show my emotions because tiger mom syndrome, right? My tiger mom did not allow me to experience emotion because she didn't care about it, right? And because of that, I had to kind of go outside of the family to kind of experience my emotions. And then finally, the spiritual development. Why did we reincarnate? I think so many people talk about this whole idea of what is the meaning in life, right? What if the meaning in life is different for every person? And because of that, it allows us to actually have a personal life fulfillment. A lot of times, and as Asian Americans, I can say this, all Asians were not bred to be engineers, doctors, lawyers. Like, that's a stereotype. Asian American being told that we have to use these engineering, basically that's a very earthy and airy elements, right? So if actually a lot of men who were sensitive to emotions, they wanted to be in the space where emotions were actually more supported. So either they became psychologists, they became counselors, they became nurses. Those were because of their spiritual development, and they came into this life actually wanting to experience emotions because maybe they didn't get to experience emotions in the last past life, and so this time they wanted to really fully embody emotions, but maybe they wanted to experience emotion as a man, right? And this is why you have these, creative men who do beautiful art that can really connect to our emotions. When you see their music, like the music hits us emotionally, right? Compared to like someone who was who was told, hey, you should be a musician, but they're actually more logical, you might miss a little bit of that emotional connection in the music, right? Which is why people say like, oh, that's music is so soulful compared to like that music makes me think about things, right? When music makes you think about it, it activates this air quality in yourself versus when music makes you want to cry, it's playing with an emotional tune to the music. And that's why this is really important to understand our soul purpose, because some of us may be coming for much more spiritual development, and it takes a while for us to kind of develop that skill, and vice versa. Maybe physical attributes, they were meant to be sports. They were meant to be in the physical jobs, right? And so if we said, hey, physical jobs don't make money, you could easily see, like, as an Asian American who wanted to be in sports, we're told, hey, Asian people are tiny people. We don't play sports very well, so don't do sports, right? Yet they could have the elements that actually would make them very, very good in sports. And then finally, I know reincarnation tends to be a very interesting conversation. I'm in Texas, and reincarnation is not a very common topic. However, it's very important because when I look at astrology, I do get downloads. I do get visions of people who tend to be younger souls or older souls. And what we find is really a lot of older souls. And this is what happens actually in why the prophecy talks a lot about how there would be older souls that would come back to this reincarnation cycle to remind us of these old lessons that we learned from our ancient traditions that we're losing today because information and disinformation is so rampant in our culture today. And so, and this is kind of my own experience. I grew up and I could not necessarily, I struggled with being friends with my peers, right? I was 10, 11 years old. I went to junior high school. And during high school, I only hung out with teachers. I really enjoyed talking to teachers. I didn't hang out with my peers. And so it was really interesting, but the stuff that I was learning in high school was super boring to me. And I would actually pick up college books, pick up books that no one was talking about. And those to me were more interesting. And so it shows that sometimes when we recognize as an old soul being reincarnated, whether you see their chart or not, usually you can tell who's an old soul. But usually if they're able to understand that, hey, you've done this a lot of times and maybe you don't have to follow what everybody else is doing, gives them peace of their spirit to not go looking to see how come all my peers are doing this and I'm not doing this, right? And that's a deeper inner peace that people sometimes need to hear so that they're able to be themselves. And so, what's really beautiful about astrology is also your natal chart, the day you were born, is who you are. I would say it's kind of like your operating system that you're running. However, we have something called cycles, right? So one of the major cycles we talk about is your birthday. In astrology, that's called a solar return. And so if you're born, like for me, 13 degrees Virgo, right? That was September 6th. However, 13-degree Virgo, because of the weird Gregorian calendar, that changes depending on the day in the Gregorian calendar. And so 1 year, September 6th, 13 degrees in Virgo could actually show up on September 5th, right? Because the sun itself has returned. And what happens when a planet returns on itself, it's almost kind of like you're getting a pop quiz. What have you learned? What have you done? And do you want to upgrade yourself or do you want to repeat life's lessons? And these are really beautiful because once you start hitting these older cycles, the older age, you start having actually planets that return on themselves. And so the sun is a good one because it's solar return. So we all experience that as happy birthday, birthday times. But some of the other ones that we don't talk as much because they're not very often is like Gemini happens too often. So after 88 days, it's already gone through the entire Mercury. So that would not be very useful, right? Versus the Mars here, 687 days. That breaks down to like 2 years. Not necessarily a very easy cycle to work with. However, sometimes men will experience a Mars return during the older age when they become more masculine, and vice versa with women. Some women, certain times of their life, their Venus would be a little bit more potent, right? Because certain energies will be helping their Venus. However, the biggest returns that we actually do talk about is something like a Jupiter return. And here you can see Jupiter takes 1 year to go through one sign. And it takes 12 years to come back into the sign it was in. And so this actually shows up in Chinese astrology like the sign in Chinese astrology. In Chinese astrology, instead of doing the 30-day sun sign, we actually experience, like for me, a monkey is the whole year of 1980, right? And so because of that, everybody in the year 1980 is experiencing the same theme. And so Jupiter, every 12 years, will repeat the theme that you were born under, right? And so these Jupiter returns are actually very benefic, similar to Chinese zodiac. And that's why in Chinese zodiac, every year that you are returning back on your sign, if it is a monkey year for me, would be either 12, 24, 36, 48, right? All these numbers show that your Jupiter or your zodiac, Chinese zodiac, is repeating itself and is bringing you abundance if you have been doing the work that you were supposed to do, right? And so what's beautiful about astrology is kind of like a report card of your soul. And so as you kind of live and grow up, you experience deeper and deeper lessons, and these lessons are tested during their returns. And so a Jupiter return, I'm tested to see whether or not, so at 12 years old, I'm kind of seeing what have I learned in 12 years of my experience, because the next year, 13, is our teenage years. Super interesting, right? So what if teenage years was actually the third Jupiter return or the third Jupiter cycle? And that's where we're actually learning to be a little bit more self-aware and more conscious of who we are, right? And we've heard this before, like the 24 years are pretty big years. 36, some people talk about 36. You hear 35, 36, 37 years. And so again, these returns actually happen all the time, but we may not realize what they are, or we don't know how to call them. And then another one that's very big is Saturn returns. Oh, y'all, Saturn returns are the toughest, but they are the most expansive, because it's almost like for 29, so if you know anything about Saturn, for 29 years, you've been developing 3 to 4 skills very actively. Where Jupiter, you can actually really quickly learn a skill in 12 years. For you to actually take 29 years, 28 years, depending on your Saturn return, this is kind of where people hear it all the time, the quarter life crisis, where, right, when like they hit 26, 27, something, and right before the cusp of Saturn, they feel like they haven't been doing or living their life. Or maybe they are, and they're ready to, if they are doing it early, maybe they feel like they're ready to like grow up, to be an adult now, right? Usually I feel like 28, 29 is when we really start feeling like we're really truly adults, right? Like we've experienced enough of the 30 years of our life that we're not able to go into the next phase of our life and be much more structured. And that's what Saturn brings. Saturn brings structure. And because of that, Saturn is able to kind of give us this ability to structure ourselves and be more mature. And then the other ones are pretty big, so we kind of won't go over that. And then finally, retrogrades. You guys probably all heard retrogrades. And so retrogrades are very simple, because astrology is actually not solar-centric, heliocentric. It doesn't rely on the sun and the planets moving around the sun, but rather it relies on us being on planet Earth and the solar system moving around us, right? And so what we'll see is, so a planet right here is actually moving to the same orbit as we are, but because we're moving faster in the inner orbit, it will show up on the sky as if the planet is going backwards in time. And that's what is a retrograde motion. And so the ancients would spend years looking at the planetary alignments and look at the stars and recognize that during retrogrades, depending on which planet was retrograding, let's say Mercury, certain things were required to kind of review, right? Retrograde just mean review, reanalyze, relook at things, redo something, right? Because it's an opportunity for us who maybe we were moving so fast, and Mercury tends to move very fast, that maybe we're like, hey, actually, I want to redo that because I think I did it too fast and that's not what I want to do. So a retrograde would happen, and suddenly we're able to actually review parts of our life where we can now take a different turn, and suddenly our life would actually kind of sometimes resettle back to where we're supposed to go. Okay. And so Mercury retrogrades are pretty often, and those are the ones we feel because we always communicate. And Mercury is a communication house or element, and because of that, the way we communicate, this is where like we can miscommunicate. And when you start to see this pattern for like 2 weeks at a time, you're like, okay, my ability to communicate has for some reason gone down. And people who have way more of this mercurial energy in their chart will tend to have much more communication breakdowns. However, most of the time, they're probably pitch perfect at being able to communicate their thoughts, right? And that's why it just shows that sometimes when we go through transits, transits are just things are happening, going on right now. Retrogrades are a way where it shows that maybe our personality changes for 2 weeks because our planets are being affected, right? And it shows that like we're not static ever. When we're born, we may have a natal chart that tells us who we are, our operating system, but the computer itself, we are still living every day, experiencing the world and what it's happening to us as if it's the first time we experienced it. And so the next piece is really transits. And these are really important to understand, because just because, my chart says one thing doesn't mean that in certain transits, I will actually change a little bit, right? And people will be like, oh, Charlie, you've changed a lot. No, I haven't changed. I just went through a transit that probably taught me a little bit of myself. And now I'm more of myself rather than before. I didn't understand this part of who I was. And so very common transits are sun transits, right? And that's what we call the seasons. When literally the sun shows up during the summer, it's very, very hot. And there's beautiful greens everywhere. All the plants are making beautiful sugars in the trees, chlorophyll. But then during the fall, this is where the sun kind of dims a little bit. And this is where the leaves all fall because they're getting ready for winter. And then winter comes, and we all hear this during the winter solstice is when the sun is starting to come back around, getting ready for the spring season, right? And finally, we hit the spring season where all the leaves, all the plants, all the animals, all the hibernated animals are coming out to play during the summer. And so this alone is astrology, right? This is astrology in action. It's just very obvious expression of the sun moving from a zodiac sign to zodiac sign, right? When sun is in Aries, it's always springtime. When sun is in Leo, it's always summertime, right? So just knowing, hey, did you know the sun is in Leo right now? Oh, wow, it must be hot out there. I didn't have to say, oh, it's summertime, y'all. We know that the transits happened. So, and the sun is a pretty big planet, and so that's, pretty big celestial planet, I guess. And so it's very important to see that if the sun can do that for us, then it's it actually means that the other planets are actually doing stuff to our planet as well. It's just like how it's really the concept of gravity, right? Where you have and we see this with the moon tides. And here we go. I have a image here of the moon, right? How the moon, when it's showing up here further, I forget, but it's whether the moon is further away from the earth, and so the tides become high tides because there's no moon pushing down on the water on the earth. Versus when it's low tide, the moon is actually pressing the water onto the earth, causing the water to actually show up as low tides. I forget the science to that, but again, it shows right there the sun is a transit and so is the moon, and both of those are causing massive shift on the planet. And it's kind of weird to say that we as humans who experience seasons and who are 80% water would not experience the movement of the sun and the moon. And so because of that, ancient civilizations would actually spend thousands of years looking at how people were affected by the celestial movement, right? Some people call those gods. The gods are moving into this part of the chart. And so because of that, we are experiencing this because the gods are mad. And maybe it wasn't the gods that are mad, but maybe it's like, hey, the moon is showing up in this. And so that's why our emotions are feeling way more agitated during maybe a full moon, right? And so, it's important because what happens near summer? Suddenly everyone, pulls out their bikinis. Everyone pulls out their umbrellas. Everybody buys sunscreen. Everyone is getting tank tops and shorts. If you don't realize that your life is changing because of the weather, then, and that's just the sun and moon, why can't an astrology weather report tell you, hey, there's a lot of Aries energy happening. Maybe we kind of want to be a little less easily angered, because at this point, if there's a lot of Aries element, maybe it's easy to get into fights during that time, right? So maybe during Aries, I would say, hey, everybody, take 3 breaths before you react, right? I could say, hey, it's summertime. Everybody wear a long sleeve because the sun is probably going to burn you. So transits are very important in astrology because our during that time, our lives change a little bit, and we will experience different things in our personalities or in our own astrology. And so usually this shows up in a chart like this, and I'll just show you my chart real quick. Here, we just went into this crazy stellium of Gemini, where we had a new moon in Gemini, then we had Venus in Gemini, and now we have Mercury who's following the sun in Gemini, but then Jupiter came into Gemini for a whole year. And so if you notice in my house here in the 10th house, it's empty. It's an empty house. That means that whatever is happening to the collective, which is whatever is happening to the planet, this energy is going to go pass through my 10th house of career and is going to activate this theme in my career. And so if you guys ever notice, I'm actually online a lot more, and it's because this Gemini is giving me the energy to actually do more broadcasting. I've actually been posting stuff online and on videos for like 4 years, 5 years. But I've never had the energy that I've had to broadcast as in the last 2 weeks. You know, I've got a new microphone. I'm finding a new way to create format, to create content for you all. And that's because this Gemini energy has given me such a boost. And I don't naturally have that element. So I am actually writing this transit to develop my online profile, my ability to speak online, to do more social media, to do more videos like this. And so I'm going to write this for a whole year to see kind of how the energies are, because it is actually my chart to have Taurus and Gemini in there. And so right now the transits has given me a huge boost to do more online content. So that's kind of how I'm using transits.